Hey guys, and welcome to part 4 of the RWBY Apron tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to ruffle the ribbon that's going to go around the top and the bottom of the apron, and then I'm also going to show you how to put the eyelets in the bodice pieces. So we're going to start with the ribbon. What I recommend you do is practice on a scrap piece of fabric just to get used to it. I am going to use a scrap of the black fabric, and I'm going to do it in red threads, that way it's easier for you to see what's going on. So to do this, you want to take your strip of whatever you're practicing on, ta-da, and you're going to sew just a straight line about somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of an inch in from the edge. You can always go more. You don't want to get any closer to the edge than 1/4 of an inch, because then you're going to risk pulling the thread out of the side of your fabric or ribbon or whatever when you actually start doing the ruffling. So at least be 1/4 of an inch in. The only reason you don't want to go too far is because then you start losing some of your actual ruffle, but really that's the only effect there's going to be. It's not going to do anything bad to your setup. And what you want to do is on your machine, or if you're doing it by hand or whatever, you want to use long stitches. So on a sewing machine, set your stitch length to the longest stitch length possible. But just do a straight stitch. Don't worry about doing any particular orientation or anything. Just do a straight stitch down, longest stitch length that's possible, at least of 1/4 of an inch inside the edge. So do that, and I'm going to show you how to make it a ruffle. Okay, so we have our strip of scrap fabric here, or your ribbon, or whatever it is you're ruffling. Like I said, I'm using red thread so that you can see it better. You'll want to use a thread when you're actually doing this that matches your fabric or your ribbon or whatever. So what we're going to do to ruffle this is you want to pull on one of your threads that's hanging off the edge. It doesn't matter if it's the front thread or the back thread. You can do either one, but you have to make sure you're consistent. If you end up pulling them both, the way stitching works is you essentially pull it into a knot somewhere in the middle, and you're going to lock your stitching in place, and then you're not going to be able to do anything. So don't do that, because we're going to have to pull from both ends. So whatever one you pick, make sure you keep track of it, and always use that one on both ends of your strip. So I prefer to pull the top thread, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. So you just take a good hold of it and kind of pinch your fabric, and you just pull the thread. You can see it's kind of pulling the fabric up as it goes. You end up with a really tight ruffle. So just, you'll ruffle a little bit at a time, you'll pull, and then you just kind of work your fabric down the stitch, so that way you spread the ruffle out. It is not the most glamorous process. It is certainly not the fastest process, but this is just how ruffling goes. So you can always make it as ruffled or as loose as you want. And we'll just kind of keep working this down. Now, when you're doing the ribbon, if you're doing the long piece that's going to go along the bottom, you can't really just ruffle from one end. It's going to take you forever. So what you'll do is, after a point in time, you're like, okay, this is as much as I feel like I can move down from this end. You just go to your other end and you start ruffling there, and you just make it meet in the middle. So again, I gotta make sure my threads are separated so I don't accidentally pull the wrong one, and I just do the same thing with the same thread that I was doing on the other side. This is, not quite as dramatic because it's a really short piece of fabric that I'm working with right now, but you get the idea. So you ruffle from both ends. You can pull it as tight or make it as loose as you want, and that is the simple process of ruffling. If you're using the satin ribbon for the ruffles on the actual apron, you want to be careful, because that is actually, even though it's still a ribbon, it's slightly more heavy duty than actual satin fabric is, it's still kind of delicate, so you want to be slow and steady. The other thing you want to be careful of with your satin ribbon is this edge will fray really easily. So before you do anything, I definitely recommend you take some of that fray check I was talking about and just kind of line the edge of your ribbon with the fray check. That'll keep it from falling apart. And it'll look kind of funny. It'll look really stiff in a different color because of the glue. And what we'll eventually do is just fold that under, and you won't be able to tell, but it'll make sure that what you can see doesn't eventually fall apart. For the ruffles on the apron, what I did is I actually ruffled the entire length of my ribbon. When I was done ruffling the entire length of it, I pinned up what I wanted across the top of my apron, because I was more concerned with that length being correct, and it's hard to pre-measure this ribbon. So I ruffled the entire thing, or most of it anyways, and then pinned it to the top of my apron, cut it to the length I wanted, and then just used what was left for the bottom of the skirt. And it wraps around to a point where you're not going to be able to tell that it's not the bottom anymore.
but I'll actually show you that later. So this is what my ruffled ribbon looks like. This one was a little bit closer to the edge than it probably should have been, but the idea is still the same. So you can kind of see, maybe you can't, you can see the thread that I pulled. It's the straight line that's going across right here. It's very tight through here. And that's how you get the ruffle, is you essentially are just shortening the length that the ribbon can travel on. So this will get attached to the top of the apron. I have a much longer piece that'll get attached to the bottom. And that's Ruffles. It's super easy. You'll also see some people recommend you actually stitch 2 lines, like when we did the one that was like, I said do it between a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. You'll actually have people that will recommend sewing it both a 1/4 inch and at a 1/2 inch, and then working on ruffling with the 1/2 inch one. And if that thread breaks because you pulled it too tight, too quickly, then you still have a backup thread. You can do that if you want. I don't in particular, but it's also because I will admit I'm a bit of a lazy sewer. So if you have the time and want to do it right, definitely do both threads, and always start pulling on the one that is further inside. But there you go. That's ruffling a ribbon. All done. Yay!
Okay, so here we have one of our squares, or at least my scrap one, of what's going to go on the bodice. We're looking at the back side right now, in case you can't tell. We're looking at, so like there's little flaps right here that we folded over last time. So right now we're going to mark this for making the eyelets on this for the cording to go through. Keep in mind this is just my scrap piece, so this doesn't look exactly like what you're going to be working with, but it's a close enough approximation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually set up the eyelets to go along this edge right here. So what we want is we want to go on and mark a straight line across here. You don't want to use necessarily your seam as reference, because your fabric might be folded over one way and your seam might go a little bit crazy in between. So we're going to actually use the edge of the fabric as our mark. You can see right here I've got a white chalk pencil because this is a black fabric. If you can use silver Sharpie, you can use actual chalk if you want. You just need something that's going to show up on here. Just if you're not using something that's made for fabric that you know is going to wash out, just be very careful you don't get any of the markings on the front side of the fabric that's actually going to show. So for this, I want to actually take a ruler and I'm going to mark on both my edges about a 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric where I want to line up my eyelet. So we've got a 1/2 inch there, and we've got a 1/2 inch here. And so you can see a 1/2 inch here is kind of off the edge of this seam. And over here, it's pretty much in line with it. So that tells you I didn't make a perfect seam when I did this. That's okay. It's totally fine. That's not actually going to be a problem. It just means this is why we actually make those marks instead of using the seam or this edge of the fabric as our reference point, because no one else is going to see that. So I've got my 2 lines. So I'm going to line those up. And I'm totally doing this upside down right now, so then I would normally do it. So bear with me a little bit. It's not completely perfect. So I make my line. There we go. So I have to be a little careful because that does change at some point. But we have where our 1/2 inch line is right now. Okay. There we go. I've kind of completed it. So the next thing you want to do is figure out how many eyelets you want. Now, I went on and laid things out, and I decided that I wanted the centers of the eyelets to be about a 1/2 inch apart, which is also part of the reason I did a 1/2 inch here. Everything's going to be square. You can do it differently. If you want to test it out, I would say take your panels and pin the cording to it and kind of zigzag it back and forth between the panels like this and say, okay, well, if this is where my corners are, this is a 1/2 inch and I like that, or I don't like that, or whatever. So I will go down the line here and I'll just make little tick marks at every 1/2 inch from the edge. So we've got a 1/2 inch here. Okay. And we have a 1/2 inch here. And so you'll just do this down the whole line. And you might have seen it a second ago, but this is one of the pieces I have prepped and ready to go for me. You can see I've got my line here and I've got my tick marks at every 1/2 inch. And so this is going to be where I want to put my eyelets. Remember that we're still looking at the back of the fabric right now. So what you do at this point is you're going to take some super sharp scissors. I actually have some embroidery scissors. These work great for this. You don't have to use anything this fancy, as long as it's something that's really sharp and preferably something that's got a very narrow tip on it. It's just going to make it easier to make the hole as big as it needs to be without making it huge. And so all you do on one of these marks is pinch the fabric. So essentially you're looking at the cross point where your tick marks and this line, our 1/2 inch line, meet, and you just make a little snip. Doesn't need to be huge.
Doesn't need to be like obnoxiously microscopically tiny though. You just want to make a little bit of a snip, just enough to be able to start getting the blade of your scissor through. That's going to be where your eyelet's going to end up being. And so you're just going to kind of work that blade a little bit and maybe trim at a 90-degree angle so you can start working it. You don't need to cut a circle. There just needs to be a rough hole in the fabric. And so we're just going to work on that a little bit until I think I can start getting my eyelet in there. And you can always make little adjustments as you go if you didn't quite cut it right on that mark to begin with. Just start cutting your hole bigger towards the direction you need to go. Like I cut it a little bit too close to this edge right here. So I'm just going to, while I'm working a larger hole in this, I'm going to kind of work it back towards the middle of the fabric. Okay, so I've kind of got my hole going there. So now I want to get my eyelet. When you've got your eyelet, you're going to take it, and from the front side of your fabric now, you're going to start trying to work it through the hole you created. And when you start doing this, I don't know how well you can see in the camera right now, you'll start to see how big the hole you made actually is and where you might need to do some extra snipping. So I kind of pull it against it and find my scissors and start trying to do those fine cuts to make the hole as big as it needs to be while I'm trying to push the eyelet through it, so that way I can see exactly what size of stuff I need. All right, so you can see I kind of was able to work it through right there, and it looks good from the front. So this is how an eyelet's going to go in. Now, some eyelets will just have this single piece, and you'll notice that the back side of this kind of has some, I don't want to say like the metal has a frayed edge, but you'll see there's kind of some little chips missing. That's a one-piece eyelet, and that's something that you're going to be able to smash down to the shape you need and hold it into place just with the one piece. I'm using two-piece eyelets, so there's actually another ring here that's just a little bit larger than the one I shoved through, but it's more narrow this way. This just caps onto the back, and so what this does is this makes it a little bit more sturdy, so that way you don't have to worry about the eyelet pulling out of the fabric that has something else holding it in. So I've sandwiched my eyelet piece, and if you have a two-piece one, you want to push those pieces together as much as possible. And that's how you do get an eyelet on here. This is only the first step in doing an eyelet, so you'll do that all the way down here. I actually have one of my other pieces ready to go where I have my entire row of eyelets. And you can do it like this. I recommend doing all of them before you hammer any of them, so that way you don't waste a bunch of time and eyelets and effort if you don't actually like how they lined up. I like how these lined up, so this is what I'm going to use. Alright, so now that I have my whole line of eyelets ready to go, I have my pieces as pushed together as they can be, everything's worked through, and I'm happy with how they line up. We're going to start actually smashing the eyelets together. The way these work is they're made of a really thin metal, and so I'm going to take a hammer and bash it until the metal deforms, and then it becomes stuck together. It's really elegant. So sewing with hammers, that's going to be the name of today's video. So when you bought your eyelets, it should have come with little tools that looked like this. You should have both of them. This is what helps you smash the eyelets together in a way that actually makes sense instead of just whacking it nonchalantly with a hammer. If it didn't come with these, you can usually find another cheap set of eyelets that will come with this. I actually had to buy a separate set to be able to get these pieces because I didn't already have them, because they got lost in a move, and yada yada sob story. I had to buy $2 worth of other eyelets to be able to get this thing. So the way these work is I'm going to do this one on the end first. So this short piece right here is going to go underneath my eyelets. Now, remember, I'm looking at the back of my fabric right now. So this is the pretty side. We don't want to damage all of this. We want this to look good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put a little piece of fabric on this anvil part right here. And the reason I am doing that is because this is painted on this black. This is paint. And so if I just start whacking it away, if it shifts at all and scrapes against this metal, this paint is going to come off and then crack, and it's not going to look good. And it's pretty much impossible to undo smashing an eyelet together. So I'm putting this here because I did a couple test pieces and found that just putting a thin piece of fabric right there will actually help protect it. So that is going to go right there. And then the other thing I'm doing is this piece right here, the long one, goes on the back side of my eyelet against this, and then this is going to be what I actually hammer to make this work. So when you see it, there's actually kind of a little divot here. There's a raised circle, a divot, and then the edge of this is raised. And so that kind of fits around the eyelet, and so that's going to help encourage it to flower out as you start hitting it. It's still not going to be a perfectly round thing when you're done, but it makes it better than it would be otherwise. So I've got my little hammer, and I'm just going to start whacking it without trying to whack myself, and I'm totally doing this with the wrong hand. Sorry, I have to block the camera. I'm going to keep hitting myself. All right, so we're going to hit that a couple times, and didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. So you'll want to just check it every once in a while as you're going. All right. So there we go. So it started bending my metal out. This one actually made a really nice seam. So it doesn't look all that different if you look at it up close until you look at it next to another one that hasn't been done, and then it's okay. And if we lift this up, this is still unscathed because I had my little protective piece right there. So now these two eyelet pieces are stuck together. The edge of the fabric is caught between them, so it won't fray apart unless you start pulling on it excessively, which it'll eventually come apart if you do that. And I've got a nice clean circle view going through here. So that is what you will do to actually put an eyelet on something. Grommets work kind of the same way, a little bit different, but those are huge, so you probably won't need them for a while. So do that 17 more times if you do it the way I did it, or with the number I did. And that is how you put an eyelet into something. This applies to any kind of fabric you might be doing and any kind of eyelet. If you're doing a single piece eyelet, it works exactly the same way. You just don't have this extra ring on the back. It's going to work the same way, and what's going to happen with that one is this one only kind of like, it didn't split. The inner ring didn't split. It just kind of like smooshed down. If you have a single eyelet, it will actually split. I think I've got an example here. Hey, look, I found my example from the cheap set I had to buy. So I did a test piece right here. So you can kind of see it a little bit. This is a silver one. You can see this like really split apart. And so that's how a single piece works. So rather than having that second ring, and don't pay attention to how effed up this one is, rather than having that second ring to kind of hold everything together, it has to make its own second ring. This still works, but it's going to put up with a lot less abuse. So I definitely, if you have a choice, recommend doing double ring, 2-part eyelets over a single part, but you're still going to be able to use this because we're not actually using this part of the bodice as a corset. It's just supposed to look like one. So it really shouldn't have too much wear and tear on it. So whatever floats your boat. So yeah, that's how you do an eyelet. And this, now you get to tell people you sew with hammers.
All right, so at this point, we're pretty much set to go and actually start putting this together. At this point, you should have your ties both for the top and the back done. We have the belt around the middle ready to go. You have your bodice pieces now with eyelets done up in them, and you have your ribbon ruffled to go around the top and the bottom of your skirt. So we can actually start putting stuff together. Next time, I will show you how I have actually pinned everything together to figure out where I want things to be attached, and we're going to get cracking. Although, at this point, I feel I need to point this out. I realize now that I actually skipped a material that you will need for this project when I was going over materials in, I think it was part 1 of what you are going to need. To finish the edge of this apron, if you don't want it to be a massive pain in the rear by folding the edges over, you actually need something called bias tape. Bias tape is something you can buy in pre-done packs, or you can make your own. I'm not going to touch how to make your own because I have yet to really perfect that, and I don't want to show you something that I am not happy with. So I definitely recommend buying some. If you can figure out how to make it, kudos to you. But it's something that will essentially, it's a folded piece of fabric with a nice finished edge on it, and so instead of trying to flip over the edge of the apron, you just set that over the edge of it and it sandwiches it together. So you'll need 1 pack of bias tape. It usually comes in 5-yard packs. The one I got is a 1/4 of an inch in width. You can use 1/2 inch, it's all personal preference, but definitely get bias tape. That is going to be very important starting in the next one, and I apologize for having forgotten about it. I haven't actually done that part of the apron yet, so it kind of slipped my mind. Oopsies. I'm glad you guys are still with me right now. I cannot wait to see how this is all going to look, and I'm really hoping you guys are finding this helpful and you might be able to make your own soon. I'll catch you guys later.